and I hope you're having a good day. And thank you for tuning in for one more video by retired Florida probation officer Kelvin Simmons, also known as Officer Simmons, and also known as Professor Simmons. That's because I taught the criminal justice and law enforcement curriculum on the college level. Today, the title of this video, which you have probably already read, is called Suicide Caused by Fear of His Probation Officer. A person might think, how can a probation officer place fear in a person who's just on probation? Doesn't make any sense. But it can happen. And it did happen. So before I discuss his story, which was a true story, one that I lived through, meaning I knew him. He was on my caseload for a few minutes, so to speak, a few days, not that long. But let me give some background on people who end up on probation, community controlled, and even people who end up incarcerated or in jail. Many of them have a history of mental health issues. And that's to begin with. The person already has that issue, so they don't need anybody beating them upside the head with a hammer and threatening them. So, but it does not mean that that person is unable to function in society. My thing is, I've had mental health issues myself a few times, especially working as a probation officer. Sometimes I thought the job was driving me crazy, but it's not supposed to be about me. It is not supposed to be about me. So it's not about me, but I have to throw that in every once in a while because I was going through. But you want your mental health issues to be situational, meaning they occur and you get through them. Even if it means you have to get help with getting yourself through that situation. And this goes out to any and everybody. When you start telling yourself, I don't need no help, you need help. Get somebody that's going to help you, even if they are the ones that get you the help, where you can talk out your situation and save yourself. And at the same time, save all of those people who care about you so they don't have to suffer. So what I'm getting at is you want to reach a point of emotional stability. That's what I call it. And that's where you are able to deal with what comes your way. A second comment I want to make before I start to discuss this particular topic here about the officer causing the suicide. It was my understanding when I worked as a probation officer that the officer was the person who was supposed to make sure that you comply with court-imposed conditions. In other words, your orders of probation or your orders of supervision. Not for you to be subject to that officer's propensities, and I like to use that word, which means not for that officer to use their biases and their prejudices towards you because of the offense that you're on supervision for. I mean, you're already on supervision for it. You don't need the officer to hammer you about what you're on supervision for. This is me as a retired officer, and when I was an officer, I want the person to know what they need to do and for that person to do what they need to do. And at the same time, I made it a point to recognize when it was becoming overwhelming for that individual, and then I would do what needed to be done to help set that person at ease, to get that person back into an emotional, stable situation so that they can do what they needed to do. I have a note here. 1980. This has to do with parolees. And I'm just throwing this out to give me an idea because I want you to have the background before I get to the suicide story. In the early 1980s, of course, I began employment in the 80s. So by the time 1981 rolled around, this incident occurred. A parole officer, also known as a probation officer, placed an individual on parole, who was on parole, into the Hillsborough County Jail. and that officer went on vacation. Oh yes, he went on vacation. And what I didn't call it this now. This is my disclaimer. But the officers who did it, they called it jail therapy. They would actually have you meet them at the jail, or they'd have you transported to the jail, and they let you sit in jail for 2 or 3 days, or they'll let you sit in jail over the weekend if you have a job. And that was their thing they called jail therapy. They could only do that to parolees, and that was because in Florida, you might not have been in the prison cell, but you were still a prisoner when you were on parole. Isn't that interesting? And that's how some officers used to do them. Well, that practice ended when this particular officer, I mean, it wasn't funny to the guy, the person who was on parole. He put this guy in jail for jail therapy, and he went on vacation. And when he came back from vacation, he forgot he had the guy in jail. I guess he probably figured it out when the guy wasn't making his monthly reports. So eventually, the problem was the jail personnel got involved, and the Department of Corrections stopped that behavior, where the probation officer was in a position where they can just throw me in jail. I say me because if you can do it to somebody that's on supervision, I could end up on supervision, and then you can do that to me. And that's how I operated. Why would I be mean to this person when if I'm in that person's position, then some other individual in the probation position or job can do that same thing to me? So that's how my mind operated when dealing with people on probation and parole. So that that went out the door. And I definitely understood why people on parole were afraid of their parole officers. And that was at the beginning of the 80s, 1980s. But you got to figure these officers were doing this way before that and getting away with it. So I'll digress for a second. Please like and subscribe to my video. It helps to encourage me to do another one. And I'll tell you, today I was a little discouraged. I was thinking, I don't really want to do these anymore. It just takes so much effort and energy. But you like, you subscribe, and I'll do a video again. But now I'm going to give you this story about John. No, his or her name is not John. This is a church member of mine who I have known for, I'm more than 40, who I have known for more than, I've known John for more than 30 years. I've known John since John was like 17 or 16 years old. And of course, John is not the person's name, and I'm not giving away the gender of that person either. But we had this conversation about, let's see how many days, about 7 days before this video, because I had intended to do a video, but it was going to be different than what I'm doing now. But John caused me to think about how officers in the position that they work, they can instill fear and emotional instability in a person on probation. My thing is, the person is already on probation, especially somebody who has not been on probation before, a person who has not been to prison. That is a traumatic, yes, they committed the crime probably, but it's still an emotional, traumatic situation for them to deal with. So they don't need me to make it that much more difficult by trying to frighten them. So my church member told me that, and I'm not gonna say everything that the person told me, but the gist of it is that the probation officer harassed. I almost said something. I almost gave the gender away. Harassed John, and just stayed on John's back, constantly telling John, I'm going to catch you in something. I'm going to get you on a violation, and I'm going to put you in jail. You don't do this, you don't do that, I'm going to put you in jail. Kelvin Simmons did not operate that way. As a matter of fact, I'll digress and give you an example of how I operated. And of course, if you read my book, see if I can get it in there, Freedom or Jail, Experiences of a Career Probation and Parole Officer. If you get your finger on that, or you go on Amazon and read the ebook, you'll definitely know how I treated people and how I operated as a probation officer. But back to John. What I did was I would, on the first visit in the office, when the person comes to visit me from court or from prison, I would remind them with this, or I'll tell them this. Okay, you're on supervision. We're going to go through your orders of supervision. But here is how I think. It is your job to cover your butt, the Department of Corrections butt, and my butt. That's BUTT. Yeah, that's your job. When you fail to cover your butt, then that leaves me to cover the Department of Corrections butt and my butt. You don't want that. And I don't. I want you to do what you're supposed to do. So you're covering everybody's butt and we're in good shape. That's it. So whenever I have to do a violation report on you, don't be saying Officer Simmons violated me. No, I did not violate you. You failed to cover everybody's butt, including your butt and my butt too. So I'm stuck with doing a violation report. I digress. I didn't always do violation reports when the person didn't cover everybody's butt. But pretend you didn't hear me say that. I would talk to them and work something out and see if they're going to do better next time. But I just be grinning. and I'm going to go ahead and tell you this because I don't want this video to be too long. But whenever I was written up, oh yeah, I used to get written up. Probation officer getting written up by his supervisors. And I have to go see the head chief, circuit administrator. I would go over there and they'll show me the violation report. And I'd read it and I say, is this it? And they'll say, yeah, that's it. And I sign and I leave. My thing was, you have to be able and willing to accept the write-up if you're willing to bend the rules to help a person get through their probation. So at least they didn't catch me every year. So anyway, hey, they can't do nothing to me now. What they haven't done, they can't do. So back to John. Back to John. So I listened to what John had to say. It took 4 different interventions of John's friend, the lawyer, to go to court to offset the threats that the probation officer was making towards John, as far as, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, I'm going to violate you and put you in jail. And I'm leaving out a whole bunch of the conversation. And that's probably because I told John Sunday, the Sunday that just passed, I told John, I was at church, I said, I'm going to leave your name out, and I'm going to not make this where a person can, figure that it was you who I was talking to. And John, who's not the name of the person, said, okay. So so I did tell John what I would have advised John to do back in 2007 had John asked me about the situation. I had solutions for when officers were overbearing. I knew how to deal with it. But if I told the person on probation, they would have to let me know or convince me that they're not going to tell the officer that I told them how to get around that situation. But yeah, if she had asked me, or he had asked me, or John had asked me, I would have told John how to work that out. But here's the good from the story that I just told you. And we're going to get to the suicide. That shouldn't take but a few minutes. The good, as far as an outcome of John's story, of being afraid, yeah, that's what I said, of being afraid and fearful of the probation officer, is that he never wants to be on probation again. That's the good, which means John's going to do what he need to do to stay out of trouble, because that officer put the fear in him. So I'm going to call that the good fear. Now, the bad. The bad is that John is convinced that probation officers are mean. That's A-R-E, are mean-spirited. That they're just out to put you in jail and not to help you get through your probation. That is the bad. Hopefully there's not too many of those type of individuals. Oh, there are a bunch of them. At least there were a bunch of them when I worked probation and parole. And I'll get to this in another video if I do a future one. The circuit knew me. They knew that if I did, and the courts did also, the circuit court judges, if I did a violation report on someone and I recommended revocation and prison time, that person overwhelmingly received the prison time. And that was because they all knew that I generally recommend an alternative to jail or incarceration. They knew that I always tried to help the person get through supervision. So if I recommended prison, that meant that that person needed to just go to prison and do their time. So moving right along to the suicide, if I can find it. Since I did all that rambling, I probably used up all my time. So suicide caused by fear of his probation officer. And I might have mentioned it a few minutes earlier. This individual had been transferred to me for supervision from another officer. And that person appeared to be relaxed. And I might have mentioned this already. He was about 35 years of age, adult white male. He had the compliant type of attitude. In other words, he was willing to do what he needed to do, that kind of thing, to get through his supervision. But I was stuck in a situation where my supervisor instructed me to transfer him. Not out of meanness. It's just that my supervisor said, he's out of your area, so transfer him. Well, I had a habit of not transferring people just because they were out of my area, because I wanted them to keep the consistency of somebody who they knew was on their side as far as helping them to get through their supervision, because I was not out there to put them in jail. Now, in future videos, this is my disclaimer. Oh, I put a whole bunch of people in jail. Yeah, I did. I'll admit to that. But if I did that, they didn't leave me no alternative. Those what I call cover my butt and the Department of Corrections butt arrest. I had no choice. Because if I had a choice, I would have taken the alternative other than the jail thing. But anyway, I had to give this bad news to this guy, which I didn't think it would be all that bad. But it was approximately 8:30 that night, and it was on North 41. It's Nebraska when you get north of Tampa. So you can see I worked in Tampa, and I kept a case that was a little bit out of the county. It was a little bit. But to me, it was for his benefit. I didn't mind going there so he could have consistency. But what I received from him in response was not what I expected. He was extremely upset that I was going to transfer him. I had to explain to him that I would keep the case, meaning him, but I don't have any choice. But he explained to me that he was afraid of that officer who he was being transferred to. Now, between me, you, and the flagpole, and anybody else that watches this video, I understood him being afraid of that officer because that officer made it clear. There was a white officer. And of course the guy was white. So it wasn't no black and he's hating me stuff. It was that this officer hated anybody with the offense that this individual had. That was it. And I knew that because I knew the officer. If you had that particular offense, the only thing he was interested in was catching you in a violation, recommending revocation, and going to court and urging the judge and the state attorney to sentence you to prison. Well, this particular guy understood that very well. But I told him, look, what you do is, I don't have any choice, so you have to go back and be supervised by that individual. Just do what you're supposed to do. Don't argue. Don't offer your opinion. If he tell you to do something and it's part of your conditions of supervision, just do them. Just do them. And it's just that simple. Well, he was still upset, but I didn't know he was upset to the point where he would commit suicide. That's one of those things that you always got to get help for that person. You can't particularly discern if that person is suicide many times. Well, after that incident, I did get better. and identifying when a person was in that type of situation. But the next week, his body was found floating in Tampa. I'm not even going to say where it was, but it was in Tampa near downtown. It was in the downtown Tampa area. And he had killed himself. So I'm not going to say any more about that, except nobody needs a probation officer who's going to be overbearing and downright nasty to them. You know, let the person violate. If they're going to violate and they're not going to comply, then you do the violation report. But don't make it personal. If it's personal, you need to find another job. That's my opinion. But thank you for listening to this video. And I ended up being long-winded again. But beware. When I was a college professor, I used to teach 4-hour classes. And I used to assign a student to watch the clock so they make sure they get their breaks. But anyway, so please like the video. And if you say I'm too long-winded, I'll put a timer on me next time. So please like and subscribe. So one day I might become a millionaire and you can come swim in my pool. You know, I'm just running my mouth. But anyway, thank you.